You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button.
LSU and Baylor in the Texas Bowl over there in Houston. It'll be the first meeting between the Tigers and the Bears since the 1985 Liberty Bowl. That one was won by Baylor. Of course, LSU fans hoping for a different outcome here in 2024. To get a closer look at the Baylor Bears, we welcome on Zach Smith of the Waco Tribune-Herald. He's on Twitter @byZachSmith, ZACH, if you want to give him a follow for all your Baylor needs. Zach, we appreciate you as always. How are you?
I'm doing great. I actually just pulled up to Houston, and I'm looking at my hotel room at NRG Stadium, so getting pumped for game day.
Here we go, man. It's practically here. Let's start kind of there. The vibe around Baylor. You kind of have to ask that, I feel like, with bowl season in general this year, because, you know, each team kind of feels differently about the bowl game that they're in. What has the vibe been around Dave Aranda and the Bears as they've prepared for this game?
I mean, it could not be higher. Vibes could not be higher. You know, ending the season like they did on a 6-game winning streak. You've got an offense led by Sawyer Robertson and Bryson Washington that is just kind of hitting on all cylinders. And so after the season that they had last year, Dave Aranda was kind of rightfully on the hot seat, if you ask me. And, you know, now he's off the hot seat, and they're here. And this is kind of a reward for everything that they've done. So, yeah, this is the vibes are very high right now.
What changed for them down the stretch and allowed them to go on that 6-game winning streak?
Really, I mean, I think it was – this might sound simple, but it's just confidence. You know, they knew what they had over the first part of the season. They knew kind of the team that they had. It was just about putting 4 quarters together. And, you know, even in the start of Big 12 play, you have that really devastating loss to Colorado. You have a loss to BYU where they almost came back and beat BYU. And those are 2 teams that could have been in the Big 12 title game very easily. And so finally, once they got to that bye week, once they beat Texas Tech kind of handily in such an emotional rivalry game, it was a homecoming for Sawyer Robertson, all of these things, it was just a confidence thing. And once they got that confidence, they were unshakable.
Yeah, man, that Colorado game was brutal. I mean, that was an absolutely brutal.
Oh my gosh,
brutal win. Might have had a little bit of a vested interest in that one late on a Saturday night, and that was brutal. Zach Smith is our guest. All right, we've mentioned Sawyer Robertson here a couple of times. I can look at the stat sheet. I can see the season that he's had, but what are his strengths? Like when Sawyer Robertson is in the zone, what does that look like for the Baylor offense?
He is one of the most accurate passers I have ever seen, and he can sling it like to a tee, like dropping dimes like you wouldn't see. And, you know, he is, like I said, he is one of the most accurate passers I've ever seen. And in this offense specifically, Jake Spavital, he's a former Texas State head coach. He coached Johnny Manziel a little bit over at Texas A&M. He fits Jake Spavital's scheme to a tee, and, you know, he can sling it, and he's very deadly accurate. And I know he's been battling some ankle injuries, and so he can also run the ball if he needs to. But like I said, he's been battling some ankle injuries, so that's been a little hampered over the last half of the season. But, yeah, he's just a dude that is accurate and fits the scheme that Jake Spavital wants to run to a tee.
1,000-yard rusher in the backfield as well in Bryson Washington. I mean, Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, first freshman in Baylor history to top 1,000 yards, correct?
Correct. And
okay.
He set a whole bunch of freshman records. The other guy that he passed is now a junior, Richard Reese. He's also on this roster, so they've got plenty of weapons back there.
Was this expected from Bryson Washington this year, or did he kind of come out of nowhere?
That's a good question. He was hurt most of last year, so they saw him kind of in spurts. They saw him in practice, and you know he didn't play the first 2 games. I want to say something like that. But he comes from a high school here in Texas, Franklin High School, it's just a legendary kind of slot T, run the ball. So he set a whole bunch of high school records. So I think when they recruited him, they knew that this was possible. But maybe I think if you gave Dave Aranda truth serum, it would be a little ahead of schedule, if you ask me.
Talking with Zach Smith, beat writer covering Baylor for the Waco Tribune-Herald. He's on Twitter at @ZachSmith, ZACH, if you want to give him a follow. Zach, let's flip sides of the ball, because obviously, look, we've kind of made it through this entire conversation without mentioning Dave Aranda, and you're on radio in Louisiana, and everyone here loves Dave Aranda and reveres him for his time at LSU, specifically in 2019. And every memory that we all have of Dave Aranda is one of the saltiest defenses you will ever see. And yet we've talked nothing about offense, because when you look at Baylor, the defense hasn't necessarily looked like a Dave Aranda defense, at least that we're all familiar with. What has kind of been the crux of their issues on that side of the ball?
Yeah, I think salty is a really good word for it, because I think if you look at the front seven, I think that's a pretty salty group. That's a pretty hardy group. But the secondary, the safeties, the cornerbacks, that's really been an issue. I mean, even going back to that Colorado game that was so devastating, it was kind of a breakdown in the secondary that led to that Hail Mary.
Yeah.
And, even in some of the games, Iowa State, West Virginia, I can just rattle them off. They give up a ton of yards through the air, and they're really susceptible in the secondary. So that's really kind of their weak spot.
What about in the pass rush game? Because, a lot's been made all season of LSU's offensive line and pass protection and allowing the least amount of sacks in the country. But Will Campbell, Emory Jones, they're not playing in this game. Garrett Nussmeier has not been under pressure a lot this season, but when he has, it's led to some interesting decision-making. How does Baylor feel they match up in the pass rush game with a different LSU offensive line fielding in the Texas Bowl?
Really well, I would say. You've got two linebackers in the middle, Keaton Thomas and Matt Jones, who are both had over 100 tackles. I believe they're the first pair of Baylor linebackers to have 100 tackles in a season since 2012. So it's been a minute there, and they're kind of, Dave Aranda has been calling plays on the defense for the first time since he was at LSU, and those two are kind of reaping the benefits of that. And then on the defensive line, you've got a guy named Trevin Ma'ai. He's a transfer from Oregon, and he's really a kind of an edge rusher. He can wreak a lot of havoc, and he's a big, bully up front. So I think going up against LSU, I think that's where they're going to succeed. Especially over the second half of the season, that the front seven was salty. They got a lot of pressure on the quarterback, and I think that they can continue to do it. They're out to prove something against LSU, and that's where they want to kind of make their hay.
A couple more for you, Zach. Your time very much appreciated. Special teams, the third phase. How do the Bears look there? Are they confident if a game comes down to a kick?
Well, it depends on who you ask. Isaiah Hankins is college kickers. I know it's college kickers, right? Isaiah Hankins, he's hit some big kicks. I think back even to last year, he had a game winner at UCF. This season, he had a game winner against TCU, which is a big rival for Baylor. But there are some other times, even extra points and some closer field goals where they've brought in the other guy. They brought in a true freshman to kind of fill in his space. So I don't know. The kicker, it's a little up in the air. But other than that, I would say Baylor has one of the better special team units maybe in the country. Palmer Williams was a first-team All-Big 12 punter. Josh Cameron, who's also the leading receiver, was a first-team All-Big 12 punt returner, and he almost brought one back against Texas Tech. So I think, there are some nerves when it comes to maybe kicking a big field goal. But other than that, Baylor's got a huge advantage in the special teams game, in my opinion.
All right, last one for you here, Zach. We'll get you out of here with this. Baylor's the favorite in this football game. If the Bears get it done, what's their blueprint to victory against LSU?
I really think you're going to see a lot of points. So I don't know what the over/under is at this point, so I think it's going to be. I would take the over, but I think you're going to see a very heavy run game with maybe some big plays. I would think that Bryson Washington rushes for 150 yards and maybe a touchdown, and Sawyer Robertson throws for 3, and they're all, 40 yards or more, something like that. I think it's going to be ground and pound and then beat you over the top. That's how Baylor's going to do it. And then, if Baylor has any chance, they need to slow down, Garrett Nussmeier. And I know that there's still some dynamic receivers and some dynamic playmakers that LSU has. So I think that limiting the big plays for LSU is going to be difficult, but that's how Baylor is going to win.
Tigers and Bears, Texas Bowl, 2:30 p.m. New Year's Eve. Zach Smith, good enough to join us here from the Waco Tribune-Herald. Again, he's on Twitter @ByZachSmith. Zach, we appreciate the time, man. Enjoy the game, and maybe we'll catch up again down the road.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Again, that is Zach Smith. Man, it's interesting because I was wondering when I asked him kind of like a blueprint for Baylor, where he'd go. Points, I agree with. Points are going to happen in LSU Baylor. The total right now is 59.5. Baylor, for what it's worth, has moved all the way to a 3.5-point favorite. I was curious if he'd go Sawyer Robertson or Bryson Washington. He went Bryson Washington, and that he'd need to rush for 150 yards and a couple scores, things of that nature. Bryson Washington has had a fantastic season. He's been a great back. I don't see him going for 150 yards against LSU's defense. LSU, since the South Carolina game, when they allowed Rocket Sanders to go well over 100 yards, LSU has allowed one running back. That's the caveat. One running back to go over 100 yards again the rest of the season. And that was Ulysses Bentley from Ole Miss. Every other running back that LSU has faced, they have held under 100 yards. That includes Le'Veon Moss, Justice Haynes. They faced some really good backs in that time, too, and held them down. And you've got basically your defensive line. You have a full-strength linebacker room. The guys who have held those backs down have done that. And for me, I really thought he'd go Sawyer Robertson there, potentially. But if it's on Bryson Washington, I tend to like LSU's chances there because they've been very good at stopping running backs in the rush game. The quarterback is where the problem has obviously come into play, as we know that. But good stuff there from Zach, and food for thought, man. That's going to be a very interesting matchup. We'll talk plenty about that more on Monday when we put a button on Texas Bowl prep, give you a final pick and prediction. LSU versus Bryson Washington is going to be a fascinating matchup, as will LSU's offensive line versus that Baylor pass rush as well that we talked about with Zach.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.